has in some form or fashion been adversely impacted by the coronavirus. And so because of that, almost every single business is going to apply for a 2-year, 50 basis point interest loan. And as they should. That's the entire point of the program. So be aware that a lot of your bankers are going to be overwhelmed with the massive amount of applications. And so if we're putting our client hat on today and we're talking about the best way to achieve receiving funding as quickly as possible, you want to make sure that you reach out to a couple different institutions. And once Peter and I are able to really hone in on what the SBA is going to require from banks specifically with respect to collection of documentation, keep an eye out for that NCBA approved lender list, because you're definitely going to want to contact them as quickly as possible. So we kind of just talked about it with respect of what type of business is eligible. And frankly, I think everybody on this call with 500 employees or less is eligible in some form or fashion for the payroll protection loan. The second question is, what is it? So for those of you that are kind of just jumping on to what this PPP loan may be for your institution and how much you might be able to borrow, it's actually fairly simple. The general gross loan amount that has been approved that banks will be able to lend to you is 2.5 times your average payroll. Now, because SBA hasn't released specific guidance on that calculation, we aren't exactly sure how average payroll will be calculated. However, most of my clients have simply said, hey, go back and calculate your average 12-month payroll and then multiply that by 2.5. That more than likely is going to be your gross loan amount. That will then be dispersed to you as a borrower. It will be deferred, and then it will be placed on a 2-year term at 50 basis points. And the purpose of this loan, as it's mentioned in the name, is to protect payroll. So it's either to keep your employees hired and continuing to be paid, or it's to rehire employees that you had to either furlough and or fire in order for them to get unemployment while your business was shut down. So if you've been negatively impacted or simply think you may be negatively impacted, you're going to apply for 2.5 times your payroll, and then you're going to make sure that the majority of those proceeds are used to keep employees employed or hire back your old employees. Now, another important part of this loan is something called forgiveness. So forgiveness is essentially the ability for you as a borrower to go to a bank, receive a loan for 2.5 times payroll, and then go back to that bank at a future period in time, to which the SBA has not said what that deadline will be yet, and say, hey, we're back up and running, we're super successful, I really appreciate you bank injecting this capital into my business in a time of need. I've used it for the right reasons, and you're going to have to prove those reasons, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I would like to be forgiven. At that time, the bank is going to receive some documentation from you. They're going to aggregate it. They're going to compare it to the documentation that you submitted. And if you did indeed use those loan proceeds for an eligible use, which is either keeping people employed or using it for mortgage interest, rent, or utilities, the bank will then submit an application to the SBA, and you will be forgiven for what we believe will be roughly 80 to 90% of the overall loan amount. That remaining 10% will then continue to be amortized over that 2-year term from the start date of the loan at 50 basis points. So some of you are probably asking, this is great, but this hurry up and wait strategy is causing anxiety. I've called a couple banks. Nobody knows exactly what's necessary to collect yet, but how can I be prepared? And I think at this point, what we're giving guidance on with our institutions and our clients, and what we're suggesting most of our banks communicate to their borrowers currently, is you definitely want to collect, if you have, 12 months of payroll tax reports. You're going to have to sign off per the SBA application on the fact that you indeed were negatively impacted by COVID, and that you're using the loan for the proper purposes, which is protecting payroll, mortgage interest, rent, and utilities, and that you have not applied and or received a government loan for the exact same purpose through another vendor, And then lastly, you have not defaulted or not an active default or delinquency of a government-backed loan. So that means student debt, that means a prior SBA 7A loan, um, or a private, or a public government-backed mortgage loan, if that makes sense. So what we've been saying is grab your payroll tax reports. You want to get a list of any owner of the business with greater than 20% ownership stake. You will not have to personally guarantee, but anyone that owns 20% or more is going to have to sign an affidavit from the SBA that says, hey, government, we're using this for the right reasons and we're applying because we've been negatively impacted. You're going to want to provide your organization docs. Clearly, you're going to need to be able to prove that the business is a functional, active business and operating. And then should you plan on using that 2.5 times payroll cash for either rent and mortgage and or utilities, make sure you're providing that utility documentation and that rent or mortgage documentation up front. You may talk to some banks that don't need that, but here's my suggestion as to why you do. Once you get up and running, you're going to want this forgiveness process to probably go as quick as possible when you're ready. And if you're going to use some of those use of proceeds for rent, mortgage, or utilities, getting the documentation and evidence of that to the banker ahead of time is going to dramatically speed up their ability to go to the government and get the government to approve your forgiveness ahead of time. We're not sure how quickly the U.S. small business community is going to ask for forgiveness, when they're actually going to ask for forgiveness, and the SBA hasn't released exact guidance on what exactly is going to need to be collected by banks and then aggregated and submitted. But we do know it is going to be an electronic-based process, and it's going to involve some human capital. And so anytime you have to call someone, provide statements, prove that you used funding correctly, and then have that packaged up and sent to the government for approval, it could take some time. And so why not use this time right now when you can't actually apply and receive funds to prepare for the future for when you're going to want that forgiveness. Now, post receipt of the loan, I would expect that most banks will reach out to you to learn more about how the bank is doing. Most banks will reach out for evidence of continued interest and or utility statements if you plan on asking for that forgiveness, and probably have one check-in call. I know Windsor Advantage is going to do that for most of our clients, so I would definitely expect that. And then once you're able to apply for forgiveness, it's off to the races, and it's pretty simple. There's going to be some work on the back end from the bank side, but not much from your end, as long as the proceeds are used for those eligible areas, which again, hiring or keeping employees, mortgage and or interest, utilities. With that said, that is the most simplistic way I think I can present the current product and to how you should apply. I guess what I'd like to bring one more aspect up is there are a couple different options and how different banks will receive applications, okay? And so there will be banks out there that have spun up online sites that you will go in and have a digital calculator and then be able to drag and drop your documentation in. And most of that is going to be a people-less or a people-light process. There are going to be other banks out there that are going to use the PDF application. If you guys and girls want some fun reading material ahead of time, go ahead and Google SBA PPP application. I wouldn't fill it out with paper and pen because I don't think most banks are actually going to accept it right now, but there is a digital PDF form on the SBA's website that shows every field that's going to have to be filled out. So making sure you can answer all of those questions ahead of time is going to help you get into the front of the line.
And thank you, Mike. And Gary, I believe that application PDF was provided as part of the notice for this webinar. Is that correct?
Yes, Peter, it was. And the link was provided to the application, and the information for borrowers link was provided also.
Great.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm seeing questions here in the chat room. Mike, do you mind if I pose some questions to you?
No, please.
One question is, will folks have have to sign a no overdue taxes document to apply to show that they're current on their taxes?
They will not.
Okay.
As of now, okay, now let me caveat before we all go into this. As of right now, the sample draft application that was provided is what you will have to attest to, and that is not on the application. Now, things can change. As of 48 hours ago, we were under the impression again that this was a 10-year note with 4% interest rate with a lot of other requirements, and it shifted, and that's okay. It's actually better for everyone on this call. So I'm not trying to sound like I'm caveating, but please be aware that I highly suggest that you double check for the newest application and use an online application and or call your banker if it's not online for when you do apply for the loan in case things change.
Good point, Mike. And I just want to emphasize what Mike just said about how quickly things are changing. A minute ago, I turned my camera off because I received a call from one of our congressmen who was telling me he's just learned we're going to get guidance tonight. And
Great.
so in terms of managing your expectations, banks will not have final guidance on the program until tonight. And so that just, it's going to take some work to change processes and get things ready for this program.
And it more than likely will take a lot of banks, the majority of banks in this country, a day or two to get set up on the compliance check. So don't get frustrated. Support your bank that you're currently with. Support your local NCBA banks and give them a day or two if you can wait that long, because most will be using it to protect small businesses, but they've got to make sure that they adhere to all the standards that the SBA is requiring.
Correct. There's a question about going back over how to determine salaries. And I've also seen questions related to that. What if you have an employee whose income is over 100,000?
Great call. Yeah, great question. So there's some great resources out there that the NCBA can send out as well. I know there's another really simplistic walkthrough from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that's been published as well. But essentially, the best way to calculate payroll costs is it's going to be two variable algebra. So it's sum of your included payroll costs, net your excluded payroll costs equals your technical payroll costs, and then multiply that by 2.5 times. Peter brought up a great point. We are capped at $100,000 per employee if you make more than that. So if for some reason you have 2 employees, right, that are each earning $150,000 of salary, they do not count into your payroll as $300,000. Rather, they would count as $200,000. So you have to net out any amount over 100. And most calculators that I'm seeing currently published, as well as most bankers, are producing tools to be able to do this for you. But it is a good back of the napkin calculation to make sure that you have netted out any excess above a $100,000 employee, and that evidence will need to be provided to get your loan.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. That's the clearest answer I've heard to that question so far, and it's being asked quite a bit. Also, what about a company or a business owner that owns more than one company? Can they apply for more than one loan?
Yeah, each company has to apply individually. So you're gonna have to apply for each individual tax ID.
Yes, based on the tax ID number. Correct. Let's see. Another questioner asked about what is included in the loan. Is insurance, cost of insurance, covered in determining the amount of the loan?
Insurance premiums are included. Yes, so that's an eligible use of payroll and rolled up into your overall payroll costs.
Okay.
From our understanding thus far.
Very good.
As well as, I guess, to spin on that, so we can just talk. I mean, same with things like payment of agreed upon retirement benefits, payment of things like state and local tax assessments for compensation of employees. Take your gross payroll that you normally always would. That's all included.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. What about contract employees? A company, the question, it sounds like the company has a number of contract employees.
I hate telling you TBD on this, but this is one of the big conflicting items that we have not received staunch guidance from the SBA on. At the beginning, we were told, take a trucking company, for example, that the overall entity that employs 1099 contractors on a continuous basis would be able to use that. We are now being told that each independent contractor is probably going to have to file on their own. So we're unfortunately not able to give you a hard answer yet. I would keep a close eye, and if you've got the time, which I'm sure you don't, start prepping for both.
Okay. Another question: Are owner employees who take a biweekly salary draw eligible for wage restoration under the program?
Yes.
Okay. Another important question. You've mentioned a number of times about getting in line. And the question is about, will the money run out? And I know the answer to that one, and we are fully expecting the money to run out.
Yeah.
And I've spoken with congressional leadership, and people that we work with have talked to congressional leadership, and they are ready to go for a phase 4 measure to provide more funding for this program. Is that consistent with what you're hearing, Mike?
That is consistent with what we're hearing. Unfortunately, it was going to run out, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. I represent banks. It was going to run out quicker on the previous structure. However, we do definitely think it will run out. I would not wait until June 29th. June 30th is your final date and your deadline to be able to apply. I would get your application in the month of early April if you can.
Okay, very good.
So I guess, can I caveat, sorry, Peter, with one thing though, thinking about the banks, but also trying to empathize with the borrowers as well. Realize that if you're, a night owl, and at 12:01 tonight, if one of your banks has a systems come up and you hit apply, there probably will be an initial backlog for fund disbursement. So you might not hear from a banker for a day or two, but I obviously can't speak for every financial institution, but they're working hard to process it. So just be patient. It's going to be a tidal wave and then kind of flow out.
Yes, and I'll add to that. I just this is a hard time to be patient because there's such an urgent need, but the banks will not get the final guidance until late tonight. And then once they're processing loans, it will take some time to get them processed and then to disperse funds. It is a tidal wave. And so we just beg your patience on that. Let's see, I'm looking for other questions that we have not covered.
So Peter, would you like me to start going through questions, or do you want to sort through the questions that you choose?
Thank you, Talisa. If you see any questions.
There are plenty of questions.
Go ahead.
I just saw one that popped up, and it looks like it's gone from a couple. It's popped up from a couple different people. There's two programs out there. There's the PPP program and there's an EIDL program. And the questions are, can you apply for both? The answer is yes, you can apply for both, but you can't accept both, and you can pay off EIDL with PPP. So my suggestion is, if you're really hustling for first in line, apply for both, but if you then get through the queue quicker with PPP, make sure you cancel your EIDL, because you have certified that you have not received, not applied. That certification is received funding for a similar purpose. So as long as you have not received direct government funds, and I know this isn't an EIDL call, but the EIDL program is a direct government funding program. You can find it on the internet. It's through the disaster recovery program. There's a 3-step process, and you can apply online. It is not related to banks or private lending institutions, and it's a great program if you can get it. I believe that PPP will go quicker once it gets started. So I highly encourage you to be able to apply for both, but then I also reiterate, make sure you cancel EIDL if you get PPP first, which I think is going to happen a lot.
Well, and for Mike, I think it's good to talk about the EIDL is the Emergency Income Disaster Loan. It's an SBA direct loan. You go to SBA website and you apply for it directly through them. What is the processing time for that?
That's still TBD. I talked to a banker who helped a great client of ours down in Florida that helped a client walk through the process 2 nights ago, and it took 8 hours online to get everything, plug it in, and submit. So it's going to take you, and that's I don't know if that's the average, and so I'm not quoting that that's the average, but I know it took one individual along with their banker up to 8 hours to get done. And then I have heard that EIDL funds have started being dispersed by the government and being received. I do not know the lead time as it is now by any means. We've mostly been focused on PPP.
Sure.
PPP will be quicker because you can prepare ahead of time, go to an online app typically, or go email your banker if you've got a great relationship with them and they're accepting, the hard information, and go and exchange. And I think a lot of banks will be able to disperse PPP funds within, a matter of a week, depending on the massive influx of applications. So definitely go for both.
Okay, very good. Talisa?
Okay, this is Janelle. There are multiple
Janelle.
questions. That's quite all right. In the question and answer section, one question I see, are expense reimbursements and/or bonuses included in payroll costs?
That has not been completely outlined yet, so we do not know.
Okay.
We will know. We will know tonight.
Okay. What if I do not have enough work for employees? Do I continue to pay them if they are at home?
Yes, that the purpose of the proceeds are to keep your employees, in, to keep them paid. A is one, and then there's the forgiveness calculation is actually based on the average number of full-time equivalents that you have each month for essentially 8 weeks, beginning on when you receive your funds. So if you plan on getting forgiven for every employee or the full use of the payroll funding that you used, right? We did our calculation. We multiplied it by 2.5. If you want to be forgiven for all of that, you have to have those employees employed, right? So if you got 25 when you got it, it's got to be 25 at the end, and that's what you're going to have to prove for your forgiveness. You can reduce employees for the sustainability of your company. No, this is not a pressure situation. But if you do reduce those employees to keep the sustainable activity of the company, your forgiveness might be dropped as well. So then you're going to have to pay that remaining balance off at a very reasonable rate right now, 50 basis points over the remaining time, or roughly 2 years.
Okay. How exactly do you determine your number of employees for purposes of the 500 employee limit?
So it's an average. So I've TBD on the final calculation of average employees, but we have been told that it's your average FTEs calculated. We most likely think it's going to be through the year of 2019 and/or as of February 28th or March 1st. So it's a TBD on the number of employees there. There are some exceptions for over 500. Restaurants are a big one, and they're one of them. So if you have a large amount of employees in the restaurant industry, you are allowed and you are eligible to accommodate more than the 500 employee rule. because they are looking at 500 per physical location, if that makes sense.
Can companies apply with more than one bank? I know you mentioned that earlier.
Yes, they can, but make sure that you're watching those funds accordingly. And the minute you get approved, you have to go cancel the rest, or else the second loan more than likely will break the certification that you signed, and you obviously wouldn't want to do that. And then if that comes up, more than likely you will not be forgiven for that loan.
Okay. What if you rehire employees? Can you pay them for prior periods, a time when they were off of payroll?
The purpose of the payroll is to be calculated as of March 1st. So if you laid them off, March 15th, et cetera, you can rehire into that level. You'll be granted the average payroll up to when all those employees were hired. So it's your use of funds for that to keep them employed.
Different things have also been said, will forgive retirement benefits. Does this include our safe harbor 3% for 401k and 401k fees we pay on behalf of our employees?
As of right now, payment of any other retirement benefit should be included in the overall total payroll cost. That's as much detail as they've given us at the current moment. So we don't know from a forgiveness period whether or not they would strip that out. However, every single calculation we have seen has not said to strip that out, which would mean that the 8 weeks of full FTEs and the cost of that, if it's included of the safe harbor or included of the 3%, should be forgiven as of now. Getting into kind of the sub-levels of these equations are what we're all in the industry really looking for, to make sure that we approve the proper loan amounts for our lenders, and we should hear more tonight. I hate not giving you the full staunch answer there, but that's a sub-level question that we expect to hear tonight.
Thank you. There are a few questions asking, did you say that the maximum forgiveness is 90%?
I did not. I said we believe the average forgiveness would be around 80 to 90% based on certain uses of proceeds. Because remember, you're borrowing 2.5 times your payroll, and that's your calculation. But then you're using that 2.5 times payroll funds not only to either rehire or keep your average full-time employees, but also for utilities, rent, and mortgage interest. And they're only forgiving 8 weeks, but you borrowed 2.5 months, right? So because you borrowed 10 weeks, and we believe your typical costs with utilities, mortgage interest, and rent are going to be less than probably that other 2 weeks of full-time payroll. There's going to be a little left over, if that makes sense. So we feel that on average, based on what we're kind of seeing, you're going to be looking at anywhere between 80 to 90% forgiven, and then paying off the remaining 10-ish% over that 2-year period. You also, I assume, as long as your bank allows it, and you wanted to, could borrow less, right? You could borrow a little bit less if you wanted to, and then provided the evidence and have it fully forgiven, and then nothing left over if you want to remain debt-free after that as well. I'm not sure every bank will be able to accommodate that, because a lot of this is going to be a programmatic approach, just given the mass influx of applications, but that could be an option.
Okay. What about a 100% foreign-owned company with a non-resident alien owner? Would they be eligible?
It's a great question. I'd like to follow back up with this thread on that. It's my understanding that you would not be eligible, but I will go back and check, because I don't want to overstep my bounds there.
Okay. Are owners included in the loan?
Owners that receive payroll, yes. So if you're evidenced on that summary of your payroll, yes. If you're 100% distributions, I don't believe so.
Can all healthcare premiums be paid? Excuse me, can all healthcare premiums paid be included in the payroll calculation?
If the healthcare premiums were all those premiums paid over the last 12 months into the summary of the sum of that 12-month average, then yes. You have to prove that what you did before in the previous 12 months is utilized for the same thing to keep those employees engaged and operating.
Okay.
Again, so we believe. We hope to get a lot more guidance on what flows into payroll and how to calculate that, it sounds like tonight.
Okay. Our company has applied for Golden Leaf. If we get this, can we still participate in the Payroll Protection Program?
I will have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
I'll have to look into Golden Leaf.
All right. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce information states that payroll taxes are excluded payroll cost. Is this referring to federal and state withholding?
Yes, I believe that's the current interpretation.
Okay. Some of these are the same. What are the penalties that we may be exposed to?
Good question. Depends on if you continue to keep your loan current. So if you decided to take the money and use it for an ineligible use of proceeds, you've certified to the U.S. government under federal law that you were telling the truth and you were using the eligible proceeds the right way. I wouldn't want to get on their bad side. So I would stay away from not using the proceeds the right way. You are not technically personally guaranteeing, but you are certifying and borrowing government funds that you're using them for the proper purposes. And based on what I've seen in typical SBA liquidations, they don't take kindly to improper use of proceeds. So that's a scary one. If you, for some reason, have a event and you continue to keep your loan current, I can't speak to how your individual financial institution will monitor your loan, but I would think that if you were trying to do the right thing, you applied for forgiveness and your bank determined that you didn't use it the right way, but you were not acting in bad faith, and the SBA wouldn't give you that forgiveness through the bank, then you'll simply have to pay the loan off over its 2-year time frame.
There's another one. I have a new business, a barbecue restaurant. The business was started in May of 2019. I then purchased the business in January of 2020. My question is pertaining to the fact that I don't have tax returns as of yet. Can I still be approved for this loan if I have all payroll records and sales numbers?
That is going to be a lender-specific question. You're gonna have to go to your lender, outline it, take your previous, if you have the 2019 tax return, show them the payroll. I assume you may have a pay some sort of federal documentation of January and February, and I would use that, and that'll probably be a lender decision. Unfortunately, we writing guidelines for a brand new financial product backed by the government in 5 days doesn't think of every single situation. So we'll have to wait and see. I could see a lot of lenders saying, let's get this done. It's in the right faith, but I can't commit to that.
Okay. Another question. What if your rent and utilities end up being a higher percentage of the loan amount than payroll?
If your rent and utilities are a higher percentage than
Payroll.
the 2 months of payroll, you should be forgiven for those 2 months and then up to, I believe, a percentage basis. Up to, I believe, it's a good question. I'm trying to do it in my head. I believe you would only be forgiven, obviously, up to what the full amount was. That would have to be documented ahead of time. It's a great question. We need to look into that.
Okay. There is a section in the PPP that states the recipient will remain neutral in any union organizing effort for the term of the loan. Does this apply to everyone who receives one of these loans?
Can you repeat that question?
There is a section in the PPP that states the recipient will remain neutral in any union organizing effort for the term of the loan. And the question says, does this apply to everyone who receives one of these loans?
Yes, I would assume so. If it's in the statute and the statute is per the product, anyone that receives a PPP loan needs to remain neutral if that is what the statute is quoting. No, nobody is given an exception to that statute. The statute is what is written in law.
Okay. How do you figure waiter and waitresses tips?
Great question. It is included and it is allowed in payroll. I would suggest hopefully you document the tips and you prove through documentation the average tips earned over that 12-month period.
Okay. There are lots of questions here. Could you review disqualifying factors again? Which things that could eliminate an application from consideration?
Sure. My blanket statement would say I am currently under the impression that almost everything as a private business is eligible, including both for-profit and nonprofit. If you are in active bankruptcy and or have previously defaulted on a government guaranteed loan and not made it whole, you will be disqualified. If you're currently delinquent and or in default of an SBA 7A, 504, or another type of government guaranteed product, you will be disqualified. Anything else should be eligible.
Okay. Are there any special provisions for nonprofits?
Not to my knowledge right now. It's a unified product. Nonprofits and for-profits are both eligible the same way.
Will owner distributions be included as salary?
I'll need to check the statute. It's my understanding right now that just to kind of reiterate that, because I know a lot of you are probably owner ops right now, that it is documented per your overall W-2 summary and or 1099 summary.
Okay. If the loan is forgiven, is it then taxable income?
Good question. I don't believe so because it's a federal loan, but I would definitely check with your CPA.
Can a small business of one apply?
Yes.
Are banks required to take applications from non-clients?
No bank is required to use this program. So a bank has the active right to not take any applications if they feel that they would not like to participate in the program. And many banks, I will say, are taking non-clients, while others, I don't believe, I can't tell you whether it's a minority or a majority number at this point, but most numbers, I do know most of my members at least are currently focusing on their current portfolios to ensure that current clients receive funds, though most are open to businesses in their local area as well. But if you have a current bank, I would go to your current bank first, and if they say we're not doing it, most banks have created a distribution network and a participation network. So your next question definitely should be, so who do I go to next? And they should be able to refer you to a couple different lenders.
Okay, thank you. We are closing in on the end of the hour, so we will take a list of the questions from the question and answer box, and we will follow up with the speakers and get answers back to everyone. Gary, did you have anything you'd like to say before I close out the call?
You're muted,
Oh,
Gary.
You're muted.
Muted, Garrett.
Oh, good. A lot of people like to do that to me, so thank you for letting me know. Well, first of all, thank you, Peter and Mike. Incredible source of information for folks to begin the process of providing some answers and some certain detail. Folks that employ people of all sizes. So, Peter, thanks for arranging this today and for what you're doing every day, you and your members, to try and sort this out to help folks. And Mike, same to you. I know you have a lot going on with a lot of clients, and the value today and the information has been a place that you can't get a lot of that good, straight candor. And it's much appreciated as people begin to plan for their businesses, but equally, if not more importantly, their employees' futures. So we are very grateful to both of you for your time, Peter, to your partnership, and Mike, enjoyed meeting you, and thank you for what you're doing every day to help businesses.
Thank you all, and thank you for hanging in there. So we appreciate it, and we're all going to get through this together.
Absolutely. And Gary, to your members, I'll just commit that we're expecting more information tonight from the Treasury. As we know information, as we receive it, I'll be sharing it with Gary, and just count on the Chamber for the latest information, straight information. Just be careful what you hear on TV and what you read from others who might have an interest in trying to help you get one of these loans.
Thank you, Peter. Much appreciated.
Thank you all for attending today's call on the Paycheck Protection Program. We hope you found today's content valuable. You will receive a brief survey of the webinar via email. We would appreciate any feedback you can provide to allow us to improve these sessions. Thank you. Stay safe and healthy during this time. As a reminder, the presentation is being recorded and will be available to all via email.